Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today, we're delving into some heart-pounding stories of survival with our topic, terrifying moments when people thought yep, I'm dead but survived unscathed. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories. I was in a near head-on collision when I was driving my family home after a weekend with my grandparents near Christmas. It was upstate New York, but the weather had been dry for the weekend. About halfway home, it started raining lightly, then heavier, then suddenly slushing. It caught me off guard, and as we came around a bend, our vehicle lost traction and started fishtailing. I tried to keep control, but we were heading right for an oncoming minivan, and I just remember thinking, this is it, we're going to hit them, and everyone's going to get hurt. I managed to swerve out of the oncoming lane and instead hit the guardrail on our side of the road. Our vehicle spun twice. I remember screaming before we came to a stop. The guardrail was twisted where we'd hit it, but we were still up on the road instead of down in the gully below the road, which would have almost certainly involved the vehicle rolling and hitting a tree. The only injury was the tight muscles in my upper back and the fact that one of our front tires was at a slight angle now and the front bumper had been completely ripped off by the guardrail. We limped the vehicle to a large enough town where we could wait for a tow truck to take it the rest of the way home and called a family friend to give the kids and me a ride. My husband waited for the tow truck. It's the only accident I've ever been in, as the driver. Airplane coming into Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta. Heavy rainstorm with swirling winds. Just as we were about to touch down, a massive crosswind caught us from the side and turned us about 30 degrees. We bounced off the runway, touched down on one side, skidded for about 100 meters, and then went off into the grass. People are screaming the whole thing. I truly thought that was it, and we were going to roll and die. The pilot did an incredible job fighting to keep us upright. We finished our skid. There were no injuries to passengers or crew. They got us off the plane, and when I looked back, I noticed our rear landing gear had completely collapsed, meaning we were bellied in on the grass. Had that been tarmac, almost certainly the plane would have caught fire. My mom got into a car accident in the late 1970s or early 1980s, where she was the passenger in a car and both she and the driver were drunk. No one's wearing seatbelts. She ended up upside down in a ditch and just had a scratch on her forehead. Another time before I was born, she got hit and ran, driving home from work at 1 a.m. on a back road with no street lights. It was like 1994, I think? She was in a Lincoln. Someone came out of nowhere and rammed the side of her car at least 15 times, like reverse, hard accelerate forward, repeat 15 times, to try and push her off the road and into a steep ditch. She was just putting all her weight on the brake. Eventually they gave up, and they took off. They had all their lights off. She still moved home. So props to her and the car. A guy I know was in a motorcycle accident as a teenager. He was going like 130 on a Hayabusa. His uncle had just gifted him some jackets with a ripcord that shot out a bunch of airbags if you left the bike. Well, he left the bike. The people he was with said they just saw a fireball fly into the guardrail. His bike was cut in half. He slid far away and ground the jacket to nothing, but even still, he just walked away with bad road rash. His friend had him drive them back home because he wanted to get back on the horse. It's a complete and utter miracle that he's still alive after that. He hasn't been back on a bike since. I went hiking once through some hill crests. The way in front of me was blocked off by thick brush, but I didn't want to trek all the way back to where the trail had previously forked, so I looked around and saw that if I cut downward across the hill I was cresting, the other fork of the trail was down there. However, immediately next to that trail was another steep drop, with jagged rocks hundreds of feet below. I decided the hillside was safe enough to slide down because it looked like soft sand upon first inspection. So I went for it, but then realized to my horror that the side of the hill was not soft sand as I had judged, but was actually hard and smooth, and I started sliding quickly towards the other trail, but so fast that I would have gone straight over the trail and down into the rocks below. But then, just in time, I noticed an old, dried out tree sticking out of the hillside and knew that was my only shot, so I planted my feet, and with the forward momentum of my slide, I leapt towards the tree, held on for dear life, and prayed it wouldn't break. The tree held, and I was able to get down to the trail safely after that. I have a few scratches and a severely wounded ego, but I'm still here. Driving down the highway, due about 75 in the left lane. A girl driving to my right, slightly behind me, wasn't paying attention and wandered into the lane to her right. One of the cars there honked, she overcorrected, lost control, and hit me. This caused me to slide into the guardrail and proceed to do something akin to the wrecks you used to see in Dukes of Hazzard or A-Team. Like a full barrel rollover, after which I landed upside down and slid another 30 feet down the middle of the highway. According to witnesses, it was pretty spectacular. Afterwards, I had to crawl out of the rear passenger side window to get out. When I stood up, the first thing I saw was everyone running towards my car. When they saw me stand, they all stopped and had expressions that can be described as "holy shit. He's alive." I was hit by a car when I was 13 and broke 3 ribs. I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer in 1995, but if you have to get cancer, that's one you want. What they way downplayed was that when you have no thyroid hormone, you get crazy mood swings, like suicidal level craziness. I had to put up with that shit for almost 10 years because they'd periodically take me off my meds to ensure my thyroid wasn't growing back cancer cells. I wrecked my academic career while working, which made me a real ball to be around. 2008 Iraq deployment. I got blown up twice, undiagnosed TBI until 2017, stopped an AK bullet on my body armor, very spent, but still, and a guy tried to beat me to death with a piece of rebar. In 2010, I was in a pretty terrible car wreck. I loved that, rodeo. As a kid, I fell off the top of a rope cargo net during gym. I twisted my ankle, but nothing else. In high school, the day before, a very angry goose chased me nearly a mile down my city's bike trail downtown. He wanted me dead. I was only distracted by a trailside restaurant when I passed on my inline skates. I was hit by a F-150 looking truck on my Kmart bike-shaped object at an intersection near my apartment one day while riding home from high school. I was in the crosswalk and had the right of way. The bike was ruined, and the driver did a hit and run because back then no one had high-quality digital cameras sitting right in their pockets, early 2000s. 20s. Another large truck ran me off the road some years later into gravel. I was riding with the flow of traffic, just this particular portion had no sidewalks built back then. Yet another large vehicle downtown, where bikes aren't allowed to be on sidewalks, decided to use fast, aggressive lane control from behind to give me no other option on my bike but to bounce off a parked transit bus. I think my body was like rubber at that point, as there was no damage to me or the bike. Downhill skiing is a pretty darn steep slope, but I've handled runs this steep without trouble many times before. Well, not this time. I caught an edge, lost one ski, and before I knew it, total yard sale, I'm rolling down the mountain with just one lonely pole to my name. This was also far from my first fall, so I quickly did what you're supposed to, which is get ass up, feet down, and dig your heels into the snow to arrest your fall. The only problem was, on something this steep, that fall was not arresting. All I accomplished was to give myself an excellent view of the huge snow-covered boulder with a sheer drop on the far side that I was heading straight for. I remember having time to think, gee, I wonder what a broken bone feels like? Before I hurtled out into open space, luckily going far slower than the folks who'd taken the same route while still attached to their skis or snowboards, because I landed in a huge pile of untracked snow in the lee of that boulder that everybody else had sailed over rather than crushing down, and wound up not injuring anything other than my pride. I spent the rest of that day at the groomers. My buddy and I were driving up a mountain pass in Colorado during a snowstorm coming back from a ski trip. All of a sudden, his truck loses traction and just starts spinning and sliding. We're literally right next to a sheer cliff with no guardrail. If we had slid right, we would have been dead for sure, but we got lucky and slid left into an embankment full of snow. His car got a dent but was barely damaged. There was no guarantee about which direction we'd slide either. The road was completely straight where we started sliding. He was driving a little fast, but nothing I would have called reckless. Plus, it was a 4x4 pickup. It was so abrupt and unexpected that I couldn't get the idea that it would happen again out of my head for the rest of the drive back, which took like 4 hours. I've never been so scared. My hands were shaking as I smoked his cigarettes the rest of the way back, even though I didn't smoke regularly at the time. When I was like 8, I went to a pool party that lasted way into the night. The pool was a black-bottomed pool that did have lights, but even then you could barely see the bottom. Anyway, there was a waterfall too that people would jump off of. Keep in mind that this party consisted of a bunch of 8 to 10-year-olds hyped up on soda, cupcakes, pizza, and all that jazz. By nighttime, though, obviously, kids were still jumping off said waterfall. Unfortunately, I was not seen from high up above said waterfall, and one of the bulkier kids jumped right on top of me. I was a scrawny little girl, but boy did this kid and I go down far. He had landed on my head. I was pretty sure he knew he had landed on a body, but he freaked out and kicked himself up to the surface. In my head, I was like, yup, I'm dying down here. Because it was so dark, the lights in the pool didn't even shine that deep. Everything was fuzzy too. This pool was a lot deeper than it should have been. I don't know if someone else saw what happened, maybe an older sibling or parent, whatever, because I know I was technically saved. Also, fuck you, Jacob, I know you knew I was down there. And I'm glad my team got you out during dodgeball. Me and my husband were driving on the highway at midnight, just heading home after spending time with family. I remember we were talking and laughing, and all of a sudden there was a huge bang, and sparks were flying everywhere while we were skidding across the road. I remember my husband yelling "oh fuck," and I was just saying oh my god," over and over again. It turns out our front right tire flew off, the bolts broke off, and everything. If it wasn't midnight, we for sure would have hit someone else. While we were skidding off the road, my husband squeezed my knee and told me to hold on. I remember thinking we were sure we were going to die, but at least my husband loved me and was thinking about me. Another time, when I was a freshman in high school, I was trying out for track, specifically the high pole jumping one. I was practicing by myself, and if anyone else has done this, you know you jump over the pole kind of backwards as you arch your back. I overdid it and ended up clearing the pole, but I landed directly on my neck. My face hit the mat first, and my neck bent backwards as my body followed. I remember laying there not being able to breathe. I couldn't take a breath in and I couldn't breathe out, and I thought for sure I broke my neck. I writhed on the mat for what seemed like forever until I could finally draw in a breath. I told my coach I couldn't do it and never went to a track practice again. Scared the shit out of me. I was walking across an intersection, and I had the walk signal. Some dipshit came speeding through the red arrow, not looking. I couldn't even see them because their one hand was on the wheel, and they were turned all the way around looking for something in the back seat while making a turn through a red light and speeding. I couldn't move, I was a deer in headlights, waiting for the impact. They looked up for a second and swerved to miss me. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds, but I remember thinking clearly enough that they weren't looking and I didn't have time to move, and I just saw their one hand on the wheel and couldn't do anything to stop what was about to happen. A woman waiting at the opposite red light in her car screamed at the driver as they sped away that they were idiots, and that was that. I think if they hadn't swerved when they did, I would have been killed or disabled for life. I have a couple. About 2 weeks ago, I was clearing out the attic in my deceased Phil's house. The floor up there is tiled. I'd noticed that there had been a leak on the roof as loads of books were wet and moldy, and I'd found where the water damage on the roof beams was. I moved a big box to one side and went to reach for some items to start packing up, like a lamp and stuff, and the floor just fell away below me. The ceilings in the rooms below are about 4 meters high, it's like a mini castle that is all fancy fireplaces and a high ceiling and shit. But somehow I didn't fall onto the hard tiled floor below, my arm and leg on one side disappeared through the floor, my other leg somehow lifted me upright, and I fell on my arse, still in the attic. My partner thought I was going to die, but I didn't have time to think much when I was all going on. The other was that I was walking by a stream that drops down a waterfall that's about 3 meters high. Where this happens, there is a gap in the rocks, about 50 centimeters across, where there's a few meters of river in this ravine. Just at the point of the waterfall, I turned to let my kid pass me on the tiny path, and the rock I stood on was covered in moss, and it had been raining. I slipped and somehow went down the gap with the waterfall. It was pretty scary falling into the blackness with little fern plants brushing past. But somehow all I did was graze my knee and back and get nasty stream water in my mouth. My mind has blotted most of that out. I just remember emerging from the ravine 5 meters downstream and having obviously upset a wasp nest in the process as I got covered in stings. 3 moments. 2015. In the hospital, very sick. Weight was down to around 5 stone. Various organs were failing. Was in and out of consciousness. I came around at one point to find a group of people around me. Relatives, some of whom I hadn't seen in years. I could see my mother, ashen-faced. I could hear my dad crying. The doctor was telling me to stay awake, not to fall asleep, as another worked to get some kind of line into me. I had about a minute of sheer terror as I realized what was happening and why everyone was there, but it passed. I was so tired and just wanted them to let me sleep. I experienced a bunch of stuff I later realized was not real, including a whole conversation with my mother, which never actually happened. Somehow survived. I ended up spending 2 weeks in intensive care, 2 weeks I do not remember. I do remember a doctor telling me just how close they came to losing me, having told my parents it was unlikely I'd last the night. After 3 months in the hospital, 3 grueling months of feeding tubes and a central line, I had to learn to walk again as my muscles had wasted away. I cannot tell you how many times I fell over trying to take a few steps or just get out of bed. 3 months of 24/7 supervision. Second moment. 2019. Diagnosed with lymphoma. By the time they'd found it, There was a 10 centimeters tumor and a bunch of lymph nodes all affected. Admitted for tests and to get started on treatment. On Tuesday morning, at 8:30 a.m., a doctor I'd never met before breezed into the room on rounds to tell me the last scan had shown it had spread into my liver and spleen, but not to worry about it because we expected this. No one told me to expect it. I'd kind of been hoping it would all turn out to be a mistake or not to be as serious as they were saying. But when I heard that it had already started spreading around my body, I thought I was done for. I was not. Thankfully, it did actually turn out not to be as bad as they thought, and after 115 days, I was sent home to continue treatment as an outpatient. Third moment. 2021. I'd had surgery to remove a whole bunch of stuff from my small bowel and surrounding area. The first couple of days were just agony. The pain was beyond anything I'd ever experienced before. Around the third or fourth day, the pain got worse, and I developed a fever. Then, a lung collapsed. At about 3 a.m., my surgeon appears, along with colleagues. He had not been at work that day, they'd called him in. Something inside me had broken, and I was bleeding internally. I remember suddenly feeling very weird. That was my blood pressure taking a dive. Then the pain got even worse. It was difficult to form coherent thoughts at this point, as they explained they were going to have to go back in right away to try to stop the bleeding. I remember being wheeled along corridors as the surgeon ran alongside, shouting out instructions to his colleagues, and I realized he was panicking. He was scared. I remember the mask being put on and thinking, this is it. This is how it ends. Damn. Suffice it to say it did not end, and I am still here. While there has been damage from all three events, it is remarkably minor. Shockingly so. I have been very lucky. Stayed up for about a week with friends on a New Year a few years ago. It started as one party but descended into about a week of cocaine, ketamine, alcohol, and everything else. I was just about to turn 18, I remember. I drank nothing except scotch for the whole week and maybe ate a large amount twice. We planned to keep going, then on maybe the 7th day, I woke up and felt very weak, like it all hit me at once, pain in my left arm and cold extremities. Heart's pounding, and it sobered me up so fast that I googled what it means, and all the signs said heart attack. I felt so faint, and every breath was horrible, like a weight on my chest. The ambulance said it would take an hour, which I said I wouldn't make, so my friend drove me to a state where I was not allowed to drive. It was a very sunny day, and I kept saying and thinking it looked too nice to die today, but I thought I was going to go unconscious at any point. The 15-minute drive to the hospital felt like an eternity, and we got pulled over for speeding past police cars to get there, but they understood. My left arm was so sore that I was certain that it was due to a heart attack, and at any moment I'd be done. Then got to the hospital, got treated pretty urgently, and was kept in and monitored. It turned out I'd partied too hard and certainly strained my heart terribly, which sent me into panic, which made all symptoms worse. It's amazing how real it felt. I'd only had one panic attack before, and that was nothing close. I'd definitely been somewhat close to dying because I would have a glass of water in the mornings, otherwise, I would have just whiskey for days and days and an insane amount of cocaine and ketamine. It was a very fun weekend, but that put dampers on it and gave me insane health anxiety, which I still kind of get. Didn't even put me off cocaine till a while after, and now it's putting me off drinking. So one night my wife and I went out to Lawrence, Kansas, for some jazz DJ lounge thing. On the way back, you could tell it had been raining. Some may understand this point. It was at Grandview Triangle in South Kansas City. 435 to 291. Right as you get on 291 there is a huge drop-off. I was talking about something, and she freaked out and yelled, "There is no God." I jacked the steering wheel side to side. Once she realized what she had done on that freshly rain-soaked road, she said sorry, and we flew off the highway into this huge drainage ditch. We slid about 100 feet before we stopped. Kid you not, it didn't hurt us or the vehicle. We called a tow truck. Then I drove us home. And this is what blew my mind. We did not see one cop car the whole time. Like 2 hours at 1 a.m. in the morning. We are divorced now. When I was about 10 to 12 years old, around 2000 to 2002, my sister and I opted to stay in the car while my mother and grandmother went looking for some furniture. Mind you, this was summer in Australia. By about the 15-minute mark, we decided it was too hot in the car and decided to leave. Except, out of habit, my mother had deadlocked the car. It could only be unlocked by the key, all the internal locks wouldn't budge. We had no way out. We started banging on the doors, but no one was around. 10 further minutes passed, and I thought we were going to die in there. I thought that was it. About 15 minutes later, 40 to 45 minutes total in the car, my mother and grandmother came sauntering back, only to find my sister and I struggling to breathe in the back. They were mortified. As they should be. I don't know if it was to make her feel better or what, but my mom said, we could get out if we just unlatched the boot door via a manual pulley accessible by the center console, so we could crawl out of the sedan. Neither my sister nor I knew you could do that. But to this day, it stuck with me that we almost died in that car, but my mother thought it was our fault because we didn't know how the car worked. I'm a parent now myself. I could never look at what happened and then blame the kids. It makes me sick just thinking about it. I was in a small plane crash several years ago. Some friends and I had rented a Cessna and flown out to the interior for a long weekend. The day we were heading home, it was quite hot, and the plane was, according to investigators, overloaded and overfueled for the heat and altitude. Once we reached 2,000 feet above takeoff, we began losing airspeed. The pilot panicked and did some steep turns in an attempt to gain some speed, but it scrubbed nearly all our altitude pretty much instantly. Now at a few hundred feet and descending rapidly, the pilot took aim at a farmer's field. They managed to level out at around tree height, but we were quickly running out of field. Maybe 100 or so meters before the end of the field, they dropped the plane to the ground, the nose dug in, and we flipped end for end. When we reached tree height, I was pretty sure we were all going to die. I walked away with some minor bruises and a small cut on my ear. No one died, but other people had much more significant injuries than me. It was not a physical event but a mind-fucking event. I was called out to a house around 9 p.m. for a plumbing issue. I pull into a very rural home with a long driveway and park in front. One of the people who live there comes out and tells me I need to park behind the house. I comply. I go inside, the door is locked behind me, and I am led downstairs into a finished basement where this particular family member lives. There is about 3 inches of sewage all over the floor covering the whole basement, and the stench is unbearable, even for a veteran plumber. I stopped a few steps from the floor, thinking there's no way I'm going into that. The man walks into the pool of sewage like nothing, goes to his coffee table, and picks up a pistol. He points it at me and says, I was a medic in Iraq, I've seen heads cut off, it wouldn't be nothing for me to blow your head off. He then puts the pistol down. Now, this is where it is important that I tell you that when he locked the door behind us, every lock was a key lock inside and out. Without a key, you are not getting out. He keeps making odd statements and veiled threats of all sorts, and he pushes me back upstairs, where his 2 brothers meet us. Things got worse. All 3 were insane, and the verbal abuse got worse and turned physical. I was shoved, punched, kicked, and threatened repeatedly. One of them says, take him to mama. I'm led to a dark room lit only by a television and a very large geriatric woman buck fucking naked, and I was informed that if I wanted to live, I would fuck their mother. She began to play with herself, and she was telling me to come fuck her. As you can imagine, at this point, I was broken and a level of fear I've never experienced at this point or since, but this wasn't happening. I told one of the brothers who seemed to have a little bit of a conscience that I have a GPS on my work truck and if I don't call in or respond to calls, they will track me, and as luck would have it, my phone rang shortly after that. They didn't allow me to answer, but when it rang again about 10 minutes later, they chose to let me go. I got in the truck and hauled ass for several minutes. I got to a lightly populated intersection with a gas station, pulled in, and proceeded to cry for about an hour. I called my supervisor and told him what happened, and his response was, okay, I'll put them on the no service list. Swimming at the beach, deep end. There was a kid trying to conserve energy that couldn't get back. He said, help. I swam over and let him grab onto me so we could swim back. I was tired already, and he brought me down. In my mind, I thought, let him get a quick break, then come up for air. Holding your breath is tiring. I came up for air and could barely stay above the surface. I thought, I'm going to die. Another man was nearby, and he came to help. He helped the kid, and I swam on my own. I was tired as shit and noticed I couldn't keep up. But I can't call for help either because I can barely breathe. All I could think was, stay calm, focus. Obviously, I made it back, and nobody gave a shit, including the kid I helped. I stayed out of the water and was exhausted. Mine is so minor compared to the rest of this thread, but about 4 years ago, I was biking across campus, and as I approached a crosswalk, I saw a yellow sports car approaching. I decided he was still far enough away for me to cross the road, which he should have been, but he spiked up to like 90 as I entered the intersection, and I seriously felt the air sucking past me as he whipped by me. I almost felt dragged backwards by the force. I think he was just inches from clotheslining me. I'm pretty sure some douchebag wanted to scare me, and he sure did, but I wonder if he realized how close he came to manslaughter charges. Even though I think I had plenty of time to cross with his original speed, I now wait for big gaps when crossing any road. No trust, lol. I never want to give up that opportunity again. I have a couple. When I was learning to ride dirt bikes, I was sat on the adult bike versus the kids. I couldn't touch the ground without leaning the bike way over, but I could reach the clutch just fine. I was supposed to go slow, but the throttle control was way too sensitive. Once I needed to shift, I panicked and just kept going. I shot across the desert till I reached a kind of natural bowl and kept circling inside it like a death cage till they caught up with me. I think the whole thing lasted like 10 minutes, but it felt like it was hours. Aside from some light scratches from a few random bushes, there was no damage. My first car was a 1969 Lincoln. I had an upsized Holly carb. Somewhere in the install process, we forgot to cut the new air filter bolt to size, and it got trimmed when we shut that heavy-ass hood for a test drive. I spent an hour looking for it, and I figured the gravel we were working on ate it. About 6 months later, my gas pedal got stuck down. I thought I was going to barrel through an intersection at full speed, was able to get the car in neutral, and just barely came to a stop at the red light where the highway ended close to my house. Aside from my heart nearly leaping out of my chest, I was fine. I found the piece of bolt wedged in the secondaries. I had no idea where it was hiding for those 6 months. I have two. The first was when I was maybe 12 to 13 years old. I grew up in South Louisiana, so we did some backwater bullshit to entertain ourselves. My dad and uncle tied a very long rope with one side way up in a tree and the other tied to a four-wheeler. Me, my brother, and my cousin all held onto the rope near the tree, and my dad would drive forward, raising us up into the air. Then he'd let off the gas, and the four-wheeler would roll back slowly, lowering us to the ground. We did this quite a few times, each time raising up no more than 5 feet or so from the ground. The last time we did it, my brother and cousin let go at the same time, and I was flung up into the air. According to my dad, uncle, and grandpa, I went up about 20 feet, higher than the house. I remember them dropping and feeling like I got launched from a bow. My feet went up in the air, I was completely upside down. I just gripped and closed my eyes, figuring that if that was it, that was it. I knew I had no control over what was going to happen. But damn it if I didn't manage to hold on. I finally landed back on the ground, having never let go of the rope, but when I did let go, I started bawling. My grandpa said it was the scariest day of his life. 2. The other was when I was a senior in high school. I was late leaving for school, and it was a gross, rainy day. I was waiting to leave my dad's neighborhood in my car. I looked left, then right, and I thought I had an opening. It turns out the traffic light down the road to my left has changed, and an SUV sped off the line, about 5 miles per hour over the limit. I pulled out of the road, then looked left and saw the grill of the SUV about 5 feet from my car. I had a split second to react, so I hit the gas to get out of the way. I didn't manage to get totally out of the way, but I did end up getting hit right in the middle of the left side of the car instead of dead on the driver's door. My car was so wrecked that people expected me to be very messed up. My hair was found in the grill of the other car, and the door was so crushed they had to pull me out the other side. Both left side windows were broken, and there was glass everywhere. When I asked my friend to get my homework for me later in the day, she told me multiple teachers saw my car and thought someone must have died with how it looked. I came out with a concussion and like 3 stitches in my eyebrow, but outside of that, I was completely fine. So, somehow, and this was about 2 or 3 days ago, I went to the supermarket, was driving out of the parking lot, and a wall of what looked like fog just appeared. I couldn't see anything. I looked up, my windows were shut all the way and closed, and I saw a giant fire coming down a building and towards me. Now, my dog died about 2 months ago, so it's very fresh to me, and he obviously meant a lot, but I was so ready to go. I was thinking, I'm going to die because I couldn't get out of where I was since so many cars and buildings were blocking, nor could I see. I didn't even plan on moving, honestly. A police officer ended up coming into my view and directing me and my car out of the fire and smoke, which was not a dog but smoke. The fire literally came out of nowhere and was engulfing anything. Both my car and I were okay, but that was a pretty close scrape, I'd say. Motorcycle accident. Cruising in the right lane, a truck pulling a trailer in the left lane tried to pass me in order to make an exit and sideswiped me at an admitted 85 miles per hour. I took a long tumble, separated from the bike, and bounced off an overpass guardrail while all the cars entering the interstate managed to dodge me as a blind obstacle just as they were accelerating up to speed. It is a terrible place to be laid out in an accident. It was a bright, sunny afternoon with no inclement conditions, But some ass just had to get around me to make his exit instead of waiting behind me. The driver admitted to speeding and being on his cell phone, which is a crime here, and the responding officer didn't even ticket him for it. EMS took 40 minutes to reach me. The driver nearly killed me, and he got off with an improper lane usage ticket. The cop was an asshole and didn't buy my story. My hip is totally fucked up from the accident, but I survived, which is more than the conditions would typically allow. I simply got lucky. The bike was totaled, and all my gear was ruined except for a horsehide jacket. Wear your gear, everyone. I went to a lecture at the university. The room that would usually fit 30 people was packed with about 90. Chairs cramped everywhere, all entrances but one in the front were blocked. I was sitting in the very back. About 30 minutes into the lecture, we heard weird noises from above as the ceiling in the back of the room started to give in. When realization hit, it was a millisecond of fuck, I'm dead to my survival instinct kicking in. Rows of chairs and crowds of people in front of me were the only escape in the very front. I still have no real recollection of how I made it out of the room, just snippets. Afterwards, my legs were completely bruised, likely from jumping over and into way too many chairs. Remarkably, everyone must have moved at the same speed, everyone got out in time, and no one was trampled. Once while driving a rear-wheel drive car with lots of horsepower. I was driving to pick up my daughter when the weather turned. Snowy, slick highway. I was cruising along when the car got loose. I tried to save it, but spun 3 to 4 times on the highway before sliding down a steep embankment. I remember thinking, oh SHT, this is how I go. Thankfully, the hill was slick, the car was heavy and low to the ground, and I just slid. It seemed like forever until I came to a stop. I figured my car was totaled, and I was nowhere near home. People called 911, and they were expecting a fatality. I got out of the car, walked up the snowy hill, and met the highway patrol. Thank goodness for his warm car. It looked like a long cable to winch it out. I took it to a local truck stop, pulled the front of the fender out, put on the spare, and drove it home. I was even able to have the original tire remounted. There were no injuries other than my pride. So many. At 9, I fell 15 feet under a waterfall with sheer walls on both sides and boulder-strewn rapids downstream. It was early spring, the water was ice cold, and nobody was answering my screams for help. I knew I was gone if I didn't get out quick. I managed to climb one of the walls by finding cracks. At 15, I was target plinking with my best friend. On the way back home, he pointed his shotgun to my head as a joke. I angrily grabbed the barrel away and yelled at him. He said, "Hey, it's empty, see?" and pulled the trigger. It was not empty. At 22, I was swimming from a boat to a small island and got caught in a current. By the time I realized I wasn't moving, I was unable to get back to the boat. I was seconds away from slipping under. Only remembering that single lesson on backfloating as a kid saved me, I was able to rest until my arms worked again. At 39, my brakes failed while going down a steep hill, with a T intersection at the bottom. On the other side of the road at the T, there was a very steep drop-off. At 30 miles per hour, I figured hitting that fence sideways would spread the impact out enough that I wouldn't fly over or through the fence and down that hill, so I went for following the optimum line for a right-angle turn, knowing at least I'd live through it when I hit the fence. That goddamned little Mazda protege made that freaking turn like a boss, which still seems impossible. Right around the same time, I was at work late at night and heard a car alarm going off as I walked to the bathroom. I'm a creature of habit, but this one time I did not pull my massive keychain out after zipping up and instead just headed back to my office. As I rounded the hallway corner, a cop 10 feet away had his gun pointed at my face and yelled "Freeze." Which I did. He was overweight, sweating like a leaf, his hands were visibly shaking so badly, and the panic was clear on him. I'm 100% sure that if I'd had my shiny metal keys in my right hand as I rounded that corner, I wouldn't be writing this. That's all I've got so far. Back when I was 18 or 19, I went to a dermatologist to get some treatment for mild psoriasis, but the office had a policy that all new patients were to submit to a full body inspection. I almost walked out when I was told to, but my dad convinced me to stay. The doctor ended up finding 2 spots on my back that he was concerned about. He did a biopsy and sent me on my way. Sometime later, we got a call that I had melanoma, skin cancer. At that moment, I thought, well, I guess I'm going to be dead soon. A couple of weeks later, I went in for surgery, and he cut 2 big chunks of meat out of my back. He told me he was cutting out more than he needed to so he could be sure he got all of the cancerous material. After some testing, it was confirmed that all of it was removed before it spread throughout my body. I had to go back every 3 months for a couple of years after that and continually get full body checks. He told me that if I hadn't come in to get my psoriasis treated, I would have been dead within 2 years. Thank you, psoriasis. There was one other time, back in maybe 2010-ish, I got into a motorcycle accident. I was riding with a group of my friends, and one of them suddenly stopped in the middle of the road in front of me. I jammed on the brakes right as I was passing through a patch of dirt or sand on the road, which is like a patch of ice on a motorcycle. My bike kind of kicked sideways and threw me off. As I was flying through the air like Superman, I remember thinking I was going to die. I landed on my shoulder and went rolling down the street. Luckily, my helmet absorbed the blow my skull would have taken. It was broken after. I had some road rash, and my shoulder gave me problems for a while after that, but I was otherwise unhurt. I got checked out by an EMT who happened to be a friend. I probably should have gone to the hospital, but I didn't want to spend the entire rest of my night sitting around in the waiting room. I was driving to my grandparents' house right before Hurricane Rita. I didn't make a whole lot of money at the time, so he's going to float me a little cash so I can afford to evacuate, drive up north, get a hotel, eat, etc., with my fiancée. So after work, I'm driving over to his house, and then that evening, my fiancée and I are going to leave town. So there's a 2-lane entry onto the highway, and in the middle of the entry there is a 4-way stop with a traffic light. Yes, it's a dumb setup. I have the green light. In the left lane, traffic is fully stopped entering onto the highway, but in the right lane, it's wide open. The speed limit is about 65, I think, and I'm driving 70. Now, I'm not able to see anything to the left of me because of the stopped traffic, and I'm in a low car, but I have the green light, so I think I'm good. Nope. Right as I'm crossing the intersection, a huge Ford F350 comes pulling through. I don't even have time to hit the brakes. I hit the truck at full speed and knocked them off the road and into a pole. But they were able to drive away. As for me, my wife's car, which I was driving that day, at the time was a 1992 Nissan Stanza that didn't have airbags and had one of those automatic shoulder straps, so I wasn't wearing a lap belt because fuck it. When I hit the car, my entire body shot forward into the shoulder strap and then down below the dash. I cracked my ribs and left a nasty bruise across my body. I was almost immediately ice cold and could barely move my arms, and it felt like I'd been shot in the chest. I could barely breathe, and I had a hard time staying conscious. I had enough energy that I called my wife at work. She worked at Macy's at the Clinique counter at the time, maybe a few miles from where I was. I wanted to apologize for crashing her car and make sure she knew I loved her in case I went unconscious and didn't wake back up. The fire department showed up and had to break the driver's side window and cut me out of the car. My wife showed up just in time to see them throw me into an ambulance and find out where I was going. She said she checked out the car before they towed it away. The dashboard had dislodged and was sitting in the back seat, and the motor was in the cab of the car. Doctors later said the reason I was so cold and fighting to stay conscious was because I was in severe shock. They also said I was incredibly lucky that I didn't fully fracture my ribs or pierce any of my organs. I started a new job the following week, and they made me go back to the doctor to get clearance to work before they'd let me start. Lol. Picture this, me and my girlfriend in a 99 Corolla, going 70 in the left lane on Highway 62 between Joshua Tree and 29 Palms, which is a 5-lane, 2 each way, with a suicide lane in the middle. I see up ahead, sitting still in the center lane, a minivan with its left blinker on. As I'm about to fly by it, the right blinker comes on, and it pulls out in front of me. Most people would have smashed right into that minivan, but I had drugs in the car, so I couldn't have that. I had enough time to say hold on. And I jerked the wheel to the right, causing the car to slide sideways off the pavement, almost flipping over along the way. I come to a stop in a giant cloud of dust. I hit the sand so hard that it broke the bead on my front right tire, popping it loose from the rim. I look to my right and I see 3 cop cars. The cops are tossing some poor tweaker's car, and the minivan just kept going, so I took off in pursuit, thinking surely one of those cops would give chase. They did not. I caught up to the van to find that it was a taxi. I called the number, and the guy said, "Did you see the number on it?" I said, "I'm chasing it now, the tag number is 7 digits, California." Right about then, the front tire that had popped loose got shredded, and I had to stop. The dispatcher was so thankful I hadn't called the cops, we'd have lost the Marine base contract over that. He came out to where we were and gave us a ride home, then the next day bought us a new tire. I went back and looked, and there were 4 perfect 45-degree skid marks going to the edge of the pavement. I didn't know until then that I was a stunt driver. I started racing motocross when I was 16. I was first right out of the gate, so I was super amped up. Also, there were around 30 to 40 other dirt bikes right behind me, so I was instantly nervous and tight. Still in the lead on the first lap, I enter a section of the track that is really fast, with a big corner at the end. Right before the corner there are the bumps called braking bumps. Well, once I hit those braking bumps, my throttle hand blew off, and I was headed straight into a chain link fence. I even closed my eyes because I knew it was going to be bad. I hit the fence. My bike stuck into the fence, sending me over the bars into a full front flip and then onto my feet. I did a once-over of my body to make sure I didn't just die. My motorcycle's front suspension was ruined. I was snowboarding on a cat track, passing a bunch of people while going way too fast, when I hit an ice ball and flew upside down into the trees. Luckily, I bounced once before I hit the first tree, hit 2 more trees in the air, bounced again, then bounced off of 2 more trees before sliding head first into yet another tree. All I remember was going fuck as I tried to grab the cat track and flew over the edge. I tore ligaments in my knee, bruised my ribs, wrenched my shoulder, and suffered a mild concussion, but somehow I rode out from there and made it down the gondola and to the hospital. I was so incredibly lucky and knew it. If I'd flown a foot more to the right, I would have hit a sign post. If I flew a foot more to the left, I would have probably impaled myself on a branch, and the way I bounced sent me sideways and leg first into the first tree instead of back or head first. One of the skiers in the group I passed stopped and yelled to see if I was okay, and I said, "I think so," and he replied, "How?" That was the worst thing I've ever seen. Whiteout conditions for snowboarding in Japan. I was on a track I hadn't been down before. I went over what I thought was a bump, but it was a drop. Ended up landing on my head. I felt the impact on my head and the rotation of me rolling on my head as I flipped over. I lay there in the snow on my back, assessing the damage. Okay, I'm conscious. Okay, I can still move my arms and legs. Okay, I can get up and don't feel too much pain. I had only 6 months earlier upgraded my helmet to one with rotational protection based on recommendations from a snowboard buddy who was a surgeon. That $300 saved my life and prevented me from being paralyzed. I splurged that night and went to the fancy restaurant and shouted at my friend as well. It tasted incredible, especially after almost dying. When I was younger, my mom, her friend, and I had gotten into a car accident. It was late at night, and we were traveling back from somewhere. On the left was a long way down into a river, and on the right was the desert. I don't remember exactly, but something got onto the road in front of us, and my mom had to swerve. She lost control because the road was slippery too. I remember her telling me when I asked her years later about it, it was either the river or the desert. We tumbled into the desert. Car rolled like 5 times. I thought my short life was over. We all came out unscathed, though. I remember being taken out of the car, and I was asking so many questions. The car was kind of fine too, though, because it could still drive. We were able to get to the police station, which was like 6 kilometers from where we rolled. Praise Jesus, ha ha. I was floating down a river with some friends, and I was in one of those tubes that has a plastic mesh across the bottom of the hole so you don't fall through. We hit a rough spot I didn't know about, and I'd been drinking, and I didn't have enough warning to readjust. So I got thrown from the tube, it flipped over on top of me, and I was essentially trapped underwater with no way up. The water was too fast and shallow for me to dive underneath and come up on the other side, and my tube was tied to others on both sides, so there was no way to move it out of the way. I was just getting dragged along the bottom of the river, pinned under the water, until we got to the other side of the rough spot and I could dive under and out. I was 100% sure I was going to die, and I don't think I even got a bruise from it. Me and a friend of mine were at a bar and went out for a smoke. I noticed 5 or 6 guys at the gazebo immediately get up and leave. I turned to one of the guys standing out with me and my friend and said, "Go inside and tell the owner or barkeep that some guys are acting shady." He went in. Before I knew it, those same guys came around the corner with shotguns and pistols, aimed at telling us to get on the ground. Contrary to what you might think, this isn't the part where I thought, "Yep, I'm dead." It was actually when they were done with us that they told us to get up and go to the bar door. They were going to rob the place. I knew the owner pretty well and knew he kept a shotgun behind the bar, and that was where it sank in. My friend and I were in the middle of it all. Thankfully, someone saw what was happening and locked the door while calling the police. After they realized they weren't getting in, they hauled us down the road, and we were immediately let into the bar. Free drinks to this day. I was riding in the passenger seat. Thanksgiving Day 1999. I was 34 weeks pregnant. My husband and I were on the way to his mom's house for dinner. It was unseasonably warm, so I had rolled my window down as we left town. We stopped for something to drink, and for some reason, I rolled my car window back up when I got in the car. About 5 miles later, a guy in a huge old 70s Caddy coming in the opposite direction turned left in front of us. My husband swerved to avoid him, but the guy swerved back into the highway instead of completing his turn. I remember the car rocking up off the tires on my side and this big bang, wrapping my arms around my belly, and just hoping the baby would survive, because I wasn't going to. We ended up partway in the irrigation ditch on the wrong side of the road. When CHP arrived, they helped me out of the car, and I looked at my side of the car and threw up. The front bumper of his car had opened my side of the car from front fender to rear, like a can opener. My rear view mirror was in a few thousand pieces all over the road, and my window was covered in deep gouges. The officer said that if I hadn't rolled my window back up, I'd have caught all that flying mirror in the face. I still ended up on total bed rest for 3 weeks because every time I was on my feet, I went into premature labor. Motorcycle accident. My buddy and I, 17 at the time and drunk as fuck, missed a curve on a forest road and flew off a support wall in front of some vacation homes. I flew over him, hit my chest on his helmet, which knocked the breath out of me, spun mid-air, and landed on my head and neck a few meters further. It took me a few moments to perceive the situation. I got up, checked if I had all my limbs attached, and went to check on my friend. His bike landed on the front wheel, with him still holding on, and just fell to the side. I found him on the ground, holding onto the bike, in complete shock, but otherwise okay. I helped him up and got the bike up, but he was still in shock. I tried calming him down enough to be able to ride, but it didn't work. I slapped him to snap him out of it, and we somehow managed to ride to the nearest bar. We both ordered the hardest liquor they had and decided it might not be the best idea to proceed to the disco we wanted to go to. When I was 12, a friend of the family, whose kids I hung out with, brought us to the mountains. She buggered off and left us there for a few hours, and I got separated from my friends. I was lost in the woods and could hear water. I found a river, so I decided that walking down the river would bring me somewhere, at least down the mountain. The only issue was that there was no path on my side, but I could see a path on the other side. I found a part of the river where branches had piled up, so I tried to cross that. 80% over the branches to the other side, they broke, and I was plunged into ice-cold mountain river water, up to the neck, holding onto a branch that I caught onto when I fell. I still remember those 10 to 15 minutes where I couldn't move because the cold water knocked the air out of me, and I kept thinking over and over, I hope that they will find my body at least, and pleading with, I don't know what. I just kept saying over and over, please, please, please. I was able to slowly pull myself over to the other side and get out. My dad cannot drive past the forest where it happened. He can't even talk about it. But that was the only time I ever thought, this is it. When I was 20, I was walking down a busy city street when a huge blue truck decided to go around traffic and cut through a bank parking lot instead. I remember standing in front of it and it coming toward me extremely fast. I touched the hood of the truck, which was a bit higher than my shoulder. I am 5'10". It hit me, and I remember as I was rolling under, I thought, wow, this is what it feels like to die. Anyway, the truck's LF tire ran over the left side of my face, and something under the truck impaled my knee and probably saved my life. Other people saw and jumped on the truck and made him stop. He still kept going about half a block, dragging me. I didn't feel a damn thing until I was at the hospital. Then it all sank in, and I couldn't stop crying. My left side of my face had road rash, nothing broken, and I had a torn up knee that they just sewed up and gave me a tetanus shot. I had one broken ankle and one sprained ankle. And my back was bruised. I literally thought I was going to die. 35M, I used to own a set of mountain bikes when I was young, 14 to 24, and did enjoy riding on each. Why 3? Because of the way I had adjusted and set up each bike. As each bike was set up for a different kind of terrain, one for asphalt roads, one for just field and gravel roads, and one for rough terrain and off-road. It did not matter which one I rode, I always tried to get the maximum performance and speed out of my bikes and myself when riding them. Which I did find out might, in some situations, not be so wise. I am not sure what age I was exactly when these incidents happened, but it was midwinter. I was living in an apartment complex in a small village. And I had a traineeship at a local small family company in another village. And most of the time I used to travel using my bikes. Which was no different that winter. Now, I myself do not have any issues with the winter season, nor with any kind of cold, snow, or ice. Personally, I love it and have always considered it my favorite time of the year. And during this winter, I did enjoy it as much as other times. Now I am used to the fact that public transport often has issues with certain types and, therefore, conditions of roads and tracks. So if public transport did not function, I was not surprised or worried, as it is a normal occurrence where I come from. Roads difficult to travel due to snow or ice, no problem. Also a common condition that often occurs in my country. So yeah, I and Annie living here are used to it and know how to handle it. Which might have made me, in some situations, a bit of an overconfident fool. Which almost let me down 2 times by almost getting myself killed by my own overconfidence while driving at high speed through these winter conditions. And the most stupid thing about it was that it was the same winter, same place, same bike, same dumb overconfident mistake, and both almost the same kind of demise. It was winter, early morning. Roads that were literally covered in ice and snow patches everywhere. And thus make it slippery and dangerous to drive. Public transportation had stopped, and there were almost no cars, trucks, or other vehicles on the road. Everyone at home, most businesses are closed. Because the roads and any way of traveling were considered dangerous or impossible. But there I was, in the dark, with a bike light only showing me a few meters in front of my bike on a road that did not look dark grayish due to asphalt but was completely white. On my bike, at high speed, just cruising. Sport headphones on my ear, connected to a booming MP3. As I got close to work, I had to make a turn on a crossroads, and without thinking it through, I just yanked my steering wheel to the right to make a turn like I always had on that crossing. Unfortunately, unlike other days where my bike would make a high speed, very sharp turn due to ice and snow and the whole road being in an ice skate lane. My bike did not turn as it had always done. My bike just slid under me, and as I fell, I slid over the crossroad onto the other lane. And as I and my bike stopped sliding and I looked up, I heard a loud honk and was blinded by big, bright headlights, and the sound of heavy screaming broke. This happened twice, in almost the same month. Both times, a 20-ton cargo truck with a driving speed of 50 to 55 km per hour sounded its horn as their surprised truck driver slamming the brakes as they saw me slide onto their lane right in front of their truck, illuminated by their headlights. Both days, ABS braking systems proved their worth and value and why they were invented. And remembered me about how valuable life lessons when overconfidence comes before the downfall. Several years ago. Driving down the interstate at night. Just outside of Nowheresville. I'm exceeding the speed limit by more than I'm willing to admit. I'm in the left lane. All of a sudden, I don't know how it happened, but my left wheels fell off the road surface. I jerked the steering wheel to get back onto the road. Now I'm spinning. All 4 wheels are skidding. I skid 180 degrees, and for a brief moment, I'm skidding backward. Headlights are coming straight at me. The skid continues. All I can think of is that I'm driving an SUV with a fairly high center of gravity, and I'm probably going to start flipping sideways. The moment one of my wheels leaves the road surface, the horizontal record player skid is going to start going tits up. That felt like the longest skid ever. Somehow, the wheels never left the ground. When my car finally came to a stop, I was 100% on the shoulder on the right side of the road. Safely out of the traffic lanes. And my car was perpendicular to the traffic lanes, so I, in the driver's seat, was looking at approaching oncoming traffic, which happened to include a semi-truck. I jumped out of the car. It was probably not the smartest thing to do at night in the dark, but I was in panic mode. Heavy smell of burnt rubber from my tires skidding across the pavement and huge, long spiraling skid marks. I walked around the car 3 times, but it seemed totally fine. I felt the tread on each tire. Warm, but all 4 tires seemed fine. A car pulls up and asks if I'm okay. I think so. Apparently they were just in front of me and saw me spin out and thought for sure I was going to flip and total my car. Thinking back, they must have been the car I was passing when I lost control. After a bit of a breather to regain my composure, I hopped back in my car and continued to my destination. There is no long-term effect other than a traumatic memory of what could have been. In an alternative universe, I'm dead, and that car was totaled that night. When I was in high school, I went skiing, and on the last run of the day, I was going down a double black diamond, the hardest trail, that I'd done once before, but it had now started to get icy. I slipped, made a turn, fell down on my buttocks, and just did not stop. I went all the way across the hill, still going downhill and accelerating, until I went into the trees off to the side. I knew I was only going to stop when I hit one, and hit one I did, face first, doing what at the time I estimated was somewhere between 25 and 35 miles per hour, probably less in hindsight, but like I said, it was a very steep, icy hill. I think I blacked out for a few seconds and then realized how much I hurt from 3 separate impacts, face, hip, and ankle. Then I started screaming for help. It took 5 to 10 minutes, maybe more, for the ski patrol to find me, then I got a ride down in a sled, and honestly, that was even scarier, before being checked out by the medics and handed off to my dad to take me to the hospital. They ended up x-raying my nose twice because they couldn't believe it wasn't broken. Nor was anything else. Other than looking like I lost a fistfight with the Terminator, having a mild concussion, and being sore for a while, I was fine. I was going to drop off some mail with my brother, and since it was a little bit of a walk, he decided to ride his skateboard there, and I borrowed my other brother's scooter so I wouldn't be left behind. On the way there was a super long hill. At the end of the hill was a busy intersection where cars tend to speed down. From the apex of the hill, the slope didn't look too steep, so I figured I could slow myself down before I even got close to the intersection. I began rolling down and immediately realized slowing down wouldn't be possible. I was only about a quarter way down the hill and was already zooming. I was riding on a narrow sidewalk, to the right of me were walled-off apartments, and to my left was the road, so bailing on either side wasn't an option. The intersection was rapidly approaching, and all I could think about was how my brother would have to tell my mom that I got run over by a car for doing a stupid stunt. Fortunately, towards the end of the hill, there was a small section of grass, 3 yards, maybe. I knew it'd be my only chance at surviving at this point, but it was a very small window. My mind flashed back to a how to survive skydiving without a parachute video I watched on YouTube, and I remembered they said to hold your hands behind your head when you land so it doesn't hit the ground. Once I was finally alongside the grassy area, I mustered up all my courage and leapt to the side, landing on the grass with my hands wrapped around my head. I rolled for a while and had my eyes shut the whole time. The scooter continued barreling down the hill for a few seconds before flipping and skidding on its side to the end of the slope. I was scraped up and bruised pretty badly, and I was shaking the rest of the way home because of all the adrenaline, but other than that, I was fine. I definitely would have died or been hospitalized if that small patch of grass wasn't there, or if I was too scared to jump onto it. I was driving down the I-25 in June 2023, between Cheyenne and Casper, Wyoming. It started to rain heavily, so I slowed to 70 miles per hour from 85 miles per hour, the speed limit is 80. All of a sudden, I was hydroplaning and spinning on the highway with no control. I just took my feet off the pedals and my hands off the wheel very calmly, and then I had this thought, alright, so this is how I will die. Here it is. And started screaming. The car did 1.5 full circles, and I ended up stopping facing the wrong way. Thankfully, there were no other vehicles around. I turned the car around, put my hazards on, and drove 40 miles per hour until the pavement was dry. I was just so shocked that I stayed on the highway. The next day, I blew 2 tires, the first 10 kilometers from my destination, and the second at my destination. I knew the tires were going to need replacement and was planning on doing it next month, but they intervened, I guess. Even with the new all-season tires, I am still terrified of driving in rain and go very slowly now. I was driving my ex-boyfriend home. We couldn't have been any older than 19. I had just left my house, not even 5 minutes away, and I live in a very hilly neighborhood. I was going up a hill packing my bowl, but I couldn't see ahead of me because I was going up a hill and then bam, a huge Dodge truck, or some shit comes flying at me right in the middle of the road. I honestly thought my life was over, or worse, I was about to witness my ex-boyfriend being killed. I remember putting my right hand on his forehead because I knew he didn't have a seatbelt on and I'd rather my hand be crushed. As if that would have done anything, all these thoughts are going through my head for half a second as I use my left hand to turn my wheel as far as it could go. I ended up just barely passing him, but unfortunately I was on such a small road. I was heading right into a telephone pole. I then turned my wheel all the way the other way, thinking I could miraculously dodge both. Then I ended up sideswiping the pole so hard that my windshield broke, my airbags popped, and the whole passenger side of my car was bent into the point where you could not open the door. I remember just getting out of the car and thanking God that my boyfriend was okay. We both got out of the car with no injuries, which was definitely one of the scariest car accidents I've ever been in. About 7 years ago I was training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in this karate dojo in a little West Australian surf town. It was a gorgeous old building owned by the local shire, surrounded by bamboo, with a gong, pond, sand raking spot, in the middle of a forest. Idyllic, beautiful. Loads of backpackers and tourists come through that town, so most days there were new people to train with. One day this little French guy shows up. Looks a bit like a hard nut, but is shorter than me. Moves really quick, quite athletic. We locked up from a standing position, kind of chest to chest, and he turns and hits me with that iconic judo throw. Well, before I go flying, I kind of stall the move out. I post my hand on his belt line and I'm balancing like crazy. So we're both hopping on one leg each, his other leg elevating my other leg. Well, turns out there is levels to judo. Because where I'm using to guys bailing on a failed throw like that, he hopped, turned over and sent both of us through the air. We both landed, me underneath on the back of my neck, on these shit 40mm foam puzzle mats. I was about 80 kilograms, he would have been 70 kilograms. 150 kilograms flying through the air, crunching onto a hardwood floor neck first, with nothing but 40mm of foam to save me. I knew I was paralyzed. I went through several stages of grief laying there. I was totally fine, completely unharmed, not even a bruise.